Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today, we're going to get into Allan Kardec, the guy who basically gave Spiritism its structure, its name, the whole 9 yards.
And it's interesting right off the bat because Allan Kardec, that wasn't the name he was born with.
Right. It makes you wonder, like, what's in a name?
Right.
Turns out, quite a bit. He started life as Hippolyte Léon Denisard Reveil.
See, even just saying that, Hippolyte Léon Denisard Reveil, it's a mouthful. You can kind of feel there's a story there before you even get to the Spiritism part.
It's not a name you forget, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But it does make the name Allan Kardec seem even more significant, like he chose that name for a reason.
Absolutely, and we'll dig into that more later, but it speaks to a conscious shift, an evolution of thought and purpose. But even before he was Allan Kardec, even back when he was Hippolyte, there were signs of a really remarkable person.
Oh, absolutely. This was not your average guy. For one, he was born in 1804.
And right from the get-go, we see this incredible thirst for knowledge. We're talking about a guy who was fluent in 5 languages.
5? Okay, now that's impressive.
5 languages. German, English, Italian, Spanish, and of course, French. Now think about this. This is the early 1800s, way before the internet, before instant translation. Learning a language back then, it took serious dedication.
It tells you something about the kind of mind he had. Like, this wasn't just some parlor trick rattling off phrases. He was engaging with different cultures, different ways of seeing the world.
Exactly. And that's key because this ability to bridge different perspectives becomes central to his work later on. He wasn't just absorbing information, he was synthesizing it, looking for the common threads, the underlying principles. It's almost like he was training his mind for the work he would eventually do with Spiritism, you know what I mean?
It's like he was laying the groundwork without even knowing it.
And the plot thickens because it wasn't just languages. His early career is equally fascinating. You might picture a guy like this, drawn to the mystical, dabbling in the occult from a young age. Right.
It wouldn't be that surprising. But that wasn't Hippolyte.
Not at all. This guy was a respected educator, and not just any educator. He worked directly with Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi. Now, if you don't know Pestalozzi...
Okay, I'll be honest. I'm drawing a blank. Refresh my memory.
Pestalozzi was a huge EGE name in educational reform. He believed in experiential learning, making education accessible to everyone. We're talking about a pioneer whose ideas still influence how we think about education today.
Wow, so we have Hippolyte, this brilliant mind who's fluent in 5 languages, deeply involved in shaping young minds through this progressive approach to education. And yet, that's not even the whole story, is it?
Not even close, because here's the curveball, and it's a detail that's often overlooked. For a time, he was a banker.
Wait, a banker? Really? No, that's not what I was expecting.
Right. It seems like such a disconnect from the world of Spiritism, the occult, all that. But maybe it's not as much of a leap as we think.
What do you mean?
Well, think about the skills involved in banking. Meticulous record-keeping, attention to detail, a methodical approach to analysis.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
These are the same qualities that defined Kardec's later work investigating and documenting spirit communications. He brought that same rigor and analytical mind to the seance room.
So even though it seems like a detour, maybe it was all part of his journey, shaping him for what was to come.
Precisely. It adds another layer to this already fascinating figure and sets the stage for what happens next. Because it's in the midst of all this, the languages, the education, the banking, that Hippolyte encounters something that will change his life forever. So we've got Hippolyte, this intellectual powerhouse, fluent in 5 languages, experience in education, even a stint in banking. You'd think he'd be immune to the allure of the occult, right?
You'd think with all that logic and analysis, he wouldn't be swayed by something as intangible as spirits. But that's where things get really interesting.
It's the mid-1800s, and Europe is caught in this wave of spiritualism.
Table turning, spirit rapping, seances. It was all the rage, wasn't it?
It was a full-blown phenomenon. People from all walks of life, from scientists to socialites, were attending these seances, desperate to connect with the other side.
And you can see why, right? The 19th century was a time of immense change, upheaval, uncertainty, wars, revolutions, scientific discoveries that challenged long-held beliefs. It's no wonder people were looking for answers beyond the material world.
It was the perfect breeding ground for both genuine curiosity and, let's face it, a fair amount of charlatanism. And into this world steps Hippolyte. Now, you'd expect someone with his background to be skeptical, right?
Yeah, you'd think he'd be the first to cry foul, expose the tricks, debunk the whole thing.
And initially he was. He approached these seances with a healthy base of skepticism.
So he wasn't convinced right away.
Not at all. He needed proof, evidence, something more than just hearsay and spooky sounds in the dark. Remember, this is the guy who worked with Pestalozzi, who valued experiential learning, concrete evidence. He wasn't going to abandon those principles just because he was entering the seance room.
So how did he go about investigating these claims of spirit communication?
Systematically, of course. It wasn't a matter of just showing up and seeing what happened. He documented everything meticulously, kept detailed records of his observations, the questions he asked, the responses he received.
He was treating it almost like a scientific experiment.
Exactly. And over time, he started to notice something interesting. Certain patterns emerged, things that couldn't be easily explained away as trickery or coincidence.
What kind of patterns?
Well, for example, he'd ask questions through mediums, and the answers would contain specific details about deceased individuals, things the mediums themselves couldn't have known.
Like what? Give me an example.
Like details about their lives, their deaths, even obscure facts that were later verified as accurate.
Okay, that's pretty compelling. But couldn't there be other explanations? Maybe the mediums were just really good researchers.
That was a possibility he considered. But then there were the instances of xenoglossy.
Xenoglossy.
Yeah.
Sounds complicated.
It's a mouthful, right? Basically, it means speaking or writing in a language that you've never learned.
So you're saying these mediums, some of whom maybe had limited education, were suddenly speaking fluent Greek or Chinese.
It was more than just a few words here and there. We're talking about communicating complex ideas, sometimes even writing in ancient languages they had no prior exposure to.
Okay, now that's hard to explain away.
It was these kinds of occurrences, these instances that defied conventional explanation, that began to shift Hippolyte's perspective. He couldn't ignore the evidence that pointed to something beyond the realm of the known. He started to consider the possibility that some of these communications, even if not all, might genuinely be coming from discarnate entities, from spirits.
So it was the combination of meticulous documentation, analysis, and those unexplainable events that led him to this conclusion.
Exactly. It wasn't about blindly accepting every claim, but rather following the evidence wherever it led. And in Hippolyte's case, it led him down a path that would forever change his life and leave an indelible mark on the world.
So Hippolyte, our meticulous investigator, he's starting to think maybe, just maybe, there's something to this whole spirit communication thing.
And this is where the story takes, well, you could say a spiritual turn.
Because he's still Hippolyte at this point, right? Not yet Allan Kardec.
Exactly. And the transition is, well, it's pretty amazing when you think about it.
Okay, so how does Hippolyte become Allan Kardec?
Picture this. He's at a seance, right? Deep in his investigations, documenting everything as always.
And suddenly, bam, his name's announced from beyond the veil.
Not quite bam, but close. A spirit identifying itself as truth suggests the name Allan Kardec.
Whoa, hold on. A spirit named Truth suggested his new name.
That's the story. And you can imagine the impact, right? Especially for someone like Hippolyte, who approached everything with such a skeptical, analytical mind.
It almost feels like something out of one of those old-timey ghost stories.
It does, doesn't it? But this wasn't just some spooky tale to Hippolyte. It was a pivotal moment.
He took it seriously, obviously. But why? What do you think made this experience so significant for him?
Well, you have to consider his journey up to this point. Years of rigorous investigation, grappling with those unexplainable phenomena, slowly opening himself up to the possibility of an afterlife.
And then boom, this name, this identity, delivered seemingly from the very realm he's exploring.
It was more than just a name change, though. It was like a confirmation, a validation of the path he'd been on. And maybe even a calling.
A calling to what?
To delve even deeper, to move beyond just investigating individual phenomena and start building a framework for understanding this entire other side of existence.
So this is where Allan Kardec, the father of Spiritism, truly emerges.
Exactly. He takes all those meticulous notes, the patterns he's observed, the insights he's gained, and he starts to synthesize it all.
He's not content with just talking to ghosts. He wants to understand the why, the how, the rules of the game.
Right. It's like he approached the spirit world with the same rigor he brought to education. Remember Pestalozzi? It was all about making knowledge accessible, finding the underlying principles, and that's exactly what Kardec did with Spiritism.
He gave it structure, a system, a way for people to understand and engage with these complex ideas.
And he wasn't shy about sharing his findings either.
That's where his book, The Spirit's Book, comes in, right?
It's his magnum opus, you could say. It lays out the core tenets of Spiritism, explores the nature of spirits, the process of reincarnation, the relationship between the physical and spiritual realms.
And don't forget his periodical, The Spiritist Review. He was dedicated to disseminating this knowledge, fostering a community of inquiry.
Absolutely. It was about more than just his own personal beliefs. He wanted to spark dialogue, encourage critical thinking, create a space for people to explore these concepts for themselves.
Which, when you think about it, is a very educational approach. He was a teacher at heart, whether he was working with school children or guiding people on a journey of spiritual discovery.
It's a powerful parallel, isn't it? This idea of illuminating hidden worlds, of making the unknown knowable.
From the intricacies of language to the mysteries of the afterlife, he dedicated himself to understanding, to pushing the boundaries of human knowledge.
And that's the beauty of Allan Kardec's story, really. It's a reminder that curiosity, coupled with a healthy dose of skepticism and a rigorous pursuit of truth, can lead us to some pretty incredible places.
It's a journey that takes us from the classrooms of 19th century Europe to the very heart of what it means to be human, to grapple with those eternal questions about life, death, and what might lie beyond.
It's a deep dive in the truest sense of the word.
Absolutely. And we hope you enjoyed joining us on this exploration of Allan Kardec, the man who bridged the gap between skepticism and spiritualism, leaving behind a legacy that continues to fascinate and inspire to this day. Thanks for listening, everyone, and until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those minds curious.